the thrift store furniture stops being cool. Where like you start to be like, you start to feel like I should be in a different place financially, success.
Everyone, and welcome back to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. I am Jackson Nikolai.
I am Jacob Mann Christensen. I'm thrilled to be here with you, Jackson, talking about another great play, a really funny play, a really uncomfortable play, a really, character-driven, intensely scene based. By that I just mean that like actors in conflict with each other is what drives this play forward, and that always makes for interesting conversation because, as the playwright notes in these several interviews, audiences really come away with very different perceptions on what happens when you have these highly character-based dramas.
Yeah, different characters kind of bringing their different goals then kind of reveals the audience's goals and the different individual people within the audience's goals and who they resonate the most with. This play is a great play for that because it's a lot of characters trying to like just make the best out of situations in life that aren't always ideal. And so it's
I think that's true as well, although I have to admit I don't know if I think that because of my encounters with the play over, the past couple days in preparation, or because of the playwright's note at the beginning of the play, where she just says that.
Yeah.
I think I may have been influenced by Gina Gionfriddo's voice at the beginning of the script. Would I have thought that just seeing the play or just reading the play, absent from her voice in my ear?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a valid question because I read that note and was like, maybe I should have read that note at the end. I don't know.
Yeah. You don't want to skip author's notes like that in plays. Although I don't know why they put this is a separate, totally side issue. It should not be called an author's note. I vehemently don't believe that playwrights are the same thing as authors, but set that aside for now.
Fair.
Fair. Author's notes, you usually don't want to skip that kind of stuff because it really tells you something important about the thing that you're about to read. In this case, though, it did feel a little bit like spoilers.
It's true. If you haven't checked the episode title already to figure out what play we are talking about, today we're talking about Becky Shaw by Gina Gionfriddo. Extremely excited to talk about it. It's a great play. And as we've said already, the way that it all kind of weaves together these characters' lives and puts them in some pretty compromising is the wrong word. Difficult situations where they're making painful choices against other people, but based on their own goals and their own objectives and their own relationships. It just is a great play for conversation. So I'm excited to get to talk about it.
Yeah, in one of the interviews with a cast member, I think it was a cast member from the off-Broadway production, although I can't quite remember, they were talking about sort of their perception of what the play is, and the description was like, it's a play about brother and sister in this very complicated relationship, but also about this marriage that's a very complicated relationship, but also about this relationship with the mother that's a very complicated relationship, but also about this first date that's a very complicated relationship. It's just like the layers of gray area, of hard decisions, of unclear paths forward are really what define the choices these characters have to make in the play. All the while, being a severely funny dark comedy.
Yeah, lots of irreverent comedy, lots of kind of noting the funny in the midst of the painful, and just kind of quick, also just quick and witty dialogue between the characters who kind of just in the writing alone displays the length of their relationship often, especially between the brother and sister kind of in the play. That just the level to which they know each other, the level to which they know which buttons to push in each other's lives in individual moments is just awesome. Great writing, and yeah, it's just full of that kind of dialogue and interesting stuff.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, the writing is so good. We've spent a lot of time in other episodes just being in awe of the sort of scene level writing that people do. I remember being blown away by a couple of the scenes in between Riverside and Crazy, for example. But and this that kind of like over bubbling of how great the writing is, the characters, the dialogues, the competition between ideas certainly holds through in this play. There are other things that happen in this play that are so enticing to talk about that we may not be able to do the same kind of like me spending 9 minutes just saying how great the writing is in any particular moment. But rest assured that Gina Gionfriddo is an incredible writer, and that her scene level, dialogue level, competition of ideas level writing is as good as anybody.
Yes. Excited to kind of jump into the conversation and kind of deal with the big sweeping stuff of the play. Before we do, we have some exciting news to share. We're announcing our themed month for this season 10 of No Script, the unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. We are excited to be kind of jumping into one of our, every season we've done this tradition of we'll take a month and kind of have a set of 4 or 5 plays, depending on the month. It's almost always 4 plays. And they're all kind of in conversation with each other in some way. And we'll kind of reflect on those previous conversations as we have the new one. It's a fun time. And this month, we're doing mini month. Or this season, we're doing mini month.
Yeah, Mini Month Part 2. We, in the past, in a different season, have also done a Mini Month. But because Mini Month is like a form theme, I guess, or a form decision, right? Rather than being about like a particular topic or a particular playwright, this is like a particular form of play in terms of length. Then it made sense for us to come back to it, because it's not like we talked about all the short plays or one acts our last go around. We only did 4, and it's not even like those 4 are representative of all short plays or one acts. So we're coming back this season 10 to mini month. We will read 4 short plays or one acts to have in conversation with each other. We'll sort of see. I remember last time we did mini month, we ended up spending some time thinking about like how a short play works different than a full-length play. What does it mean when you say my play is a one act or a short play? Why, in fact, do contemporary playwrights not really write one acts anymore? It's just not a form that is as popular as it was in especially like the mid and late 20th century.
Yeah, that's a fascinating conversation. We'll have that conversation during the month, maybe. But it is a fascinating form, a fascinating like kind of like you got to pack so much punch into that shorter, page length, and excited to kind of reflect on that a bit more in the month to come. I believe we're 3 weeks away from that.
Yeah, it should be like 3 episodes from now. It'll happen if you listen along as we go in April of this season. April 2023 will be our themed month for season 10. If you're listening back, it should start in about 3 episodes from now. It'll be, highlighted in the podcast. We'll be talking about it more as we get closer to. But as our big public, hey, themed month is coming up. Mini month part 2, short plays. We're looking forward to it. Hope that you are too.
Yes, indeed. Looking forward to chatting with you all about that. Mark your calendars, mark your play shelves if you want to read along with the plays, and excited to jump into that conversation with all of you.
Yeah, okay. Before we jump into our episode about Becky Shaw, we just want to take our regular moment to encourage you to consider heading on over to patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. That's all one word, no hyphens, no underscores. Patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. Over there, you can become a supporter of the show. This is sort of how we fund the life of the show, is through Patreon. At this time, we're not like getting paid by advertisers to insert ads in the middle of the show in order to fund the running of it. We have an incredibly supportive community who wants to have these conversations, who wants to have this chance to listen to us talk about plays and then engage with us in those conversations afterwards. And those people think it's a valuable enough proposition to have in the world that they support us on Patreon. We really believe in keeping the level of support accessible to everybody. So that the lowest tier that you can join in on is $1 a month. It totals $12 a year. At that amount, you're a patron of the show, and we're super grateful. That amount is super helpful. So check it out. There's higher tiers, of course. If you can afford more, it really benefits the show to have that come in. We say, almost every time we talk about it, Jackson and I love to do the show. It's a great part of our lives. We love to talk about plays. That's why we started doing it. But running this podcast at this level in this way would not be possible without the folks that support us over on Patreon. There's financial costs, there's the time investment, all of that goes into being able to make this show run. And the folks on Patreon make it happen through their support. It's a crowd-funded model, that people in bulk decide that this is valuable to them, and that makes it possible to continue doing in the way that it's been done. If it's not you yet, if you're not one of those supporters, please think about it. Again, lowest tier is $1 a month. We really believe that that's affordable for the vast majority of people who are listeners of this show. So please think about it. If that is you, if you're one of those patrons, it's our regular episode reminder that we are so grateful for your contribution. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Again, it couldn't happen without you. So please know that your support makes doing this possible. We hope to see everybody over there on Patreon. Those folks over there probably already know what the scripts for mini month coming up are. That's one of the benefits. There are others. You can check them out over there. Thanks to everybody who supports the show.
Yes, thank you all so much. A delight to get to share these conversations with you over on patreon.com/noscriptpodcast.
And now back to the script.
Here we go. All right, I'm going to jump into some brief context about this play. We've already done Gina Gionfriddo on the podcast before, and we've done Rapture, Blister, Burn in previous seasons. So I'll just give the short
title. Great.
Yeah,
I don't even remember what I said about it. Now that I'm saying great title out loud, I feel like maybe I didn't think that before. I don't know. At this moment in time, I think Rapture, Blister, Burn is a great title.
Definitely kind of brings you in, makes you wonder what happened. So we've done some context on Gionfriddo before, but suffice to say, as we've already kind of gushed in the earlier parts of this episode, we're such fans. She's an American playwright, television writer, known for her work on certainly on this play, Becky Shaw on Rapture, Blister, Burn. After Ashley is another one of her big plays. She's also a writer on Law and Order and FBI Most Wanted. An oft-produced and often writing playwright. This play, Becky Shaw, received its first production at the Humana Festival at the Actors Theater in Louisville. Yeah. We're on a bit of a run this season of talking about the Humana Festival. So that was in 2008, in February of 2008. Received great reviews at the time and somewhat quickly transitioned to an off-Broadway production at the Second Stage Theater. That production ran for about 4 months. It was extended through kind of started at the end of 2008 and extended through to March 2009. Great production, great show. Interestingly, there's kind of a continued artistic partnership between Gionfriddo and Peter Dubois, who has directed many of her plays. So Dubois directed that production as well. There were a number.
I think I would hate to have this totally wrong, but my understanding from some interviews is that they went to graduate school together, and then even sort of lived together in a platonic way. But they were artistic partners, and so they sort of forged into the world together in that way, starting with their graduate school work together.
Yeah, I believe that's right as well. And they kind of continue to do plays. Going on into even like I believe her last production, 2016 production of Can You Forgive Her, was also directed by Dubois. So This production though,
which is
Becky.
also a novel adaptation.
Ooh.
Can You Forgive Her? I read, and that is true of this play too. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm somebody that's very interested in novel adaptations as a sort of premise for creating new dramatic work. So I actually didn't know that Gina Gionfriddo had done this level of work with novel adaptation. So that is fascinating to me.
Definitely, yeah. This show, though, Becky Shaw was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for Drama, as was Rapture Blister Burn. So Gionfriddo multiple times finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. It also was nominated for a number of other awards. Gionfriddo won the Outer Critics Award in 2009 around the release of this play. The play was nominated for the Liz C. Lordell Award, Outer Critics Circle Award, and the Drama Desk Award as Outstanding Play. Well-lauded play, and then kind of hits the regional scene. And I don't have a list of all those productions, obviously, but this play is often produced. It's a cast of 5 characters. Some, we were talking before the show, some complication in terms of the locations that you have to go to. So for smaller regional houses, you got to have a nice back stock of like hotel furniture and home furniture and stuff like that to kind of pull off the different locations. But lots of ways to produce this play and great characters to get to dig into. If you're a regional actor and have a chance to be in this show, please be in the show. I'll be looking for it for sure.
Yeah, the character work especially, but you're right about the locationality of it, and because the play is about to some degree like class and environment and that kind of those kinds of relationship things, it is hard to imagine this show without the kind of environmental dressing of every individual location that would be, you know, maybe somewhat hard to do because there are several. I mean, what, like 4 to 6 different locations throughout the play. And you really, I think you kind of need that, what is around them, the kind of stuff they own in contrast with the other scenes that tells part of the story to some level.
Yeah, and also what different characters are willing to buy, because class and money are such an important part of some of the underpinnings of this play. And so seeing the different like hotel rooms that they're in, notably like there's like star grading difference between different hotel rooms that show up in the play. So yeah, all of that is kind of an important part of the storytelling, at least to some degree.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So, hey, in anticipation of talking about that kind of stuff, here's just a brief overview, a brief summary for you so that we're all kind of on the same page. As I said earlier, Becky Shaw is a kind of novel adaptation. Gina Gionfriddo talks about reading the novel Vanity Fair as she was sort of gathering the fodder for a new play. That novel, it was published as a serial in like, before 1850. So we're talking about a really old novel. The novel is quite long. It's about a lot of different stuff. But one of the plots of that novel is a woman named Becky Sharp, who is sort of in a lower class in society and desires to marry into a higher class. And so she has a friend who has a brother, and she tries to marry the brother, and the friend is the brother. Well, all that to say, I'm not going to go through the novel story. That just doesn't make a ton of sense for the use of our time. But all this to say, it is a, generally speaking, kind of a loose adaptation of that part of the Vanity Fair novel. You'll see, of course, that character's name is Becky Sharp. This character's name is Becky Shaw. Now, what is interesting about this play and its title is that Becky Shaw is like only one of several major characters in this play who go through, major things across the course of the show. We may talk about, I'm actually fascinated by why she titled this play, and there's an interesting tidbit of a story about that in the playwright's note, the author's note, at the beginning of the script that we can maybe talk about. But the plot, I'll just go through it at the most basic level. There is a woman named Susanna, and she is in a hotel room at the beginning of the play. We learn her sort of brother, although they are not actually related, her adopted brother, let's say. Max, these are older people. These are older. They're not kids anymore. They're in like their 30s. Max and Susanna have a discussion in a hotel room where we learn that Susanna's father has just passed away, and that due to his financial decisions, he has not left them in a very good financial position. So they've come to New York City to meet Susanna's mother, Susan, and Max's like adoptive mother, Susan, to discuss what the plan is going forward. You learn very quickly that there's a lot of conflict in this family. Susan doesn't like to talk about money. She doesn't like to talk about the decisions that her husband made. Max makes an accusation that her husband was potentially in a homosexual relationship with his business partner, which is why he made such bad financial decisions. It really sort of spins out into a big argument. You get some stories about Max and Susanna where it becomes very clear that they're adoptive siblings, that Susan and her husband took Max in after a bad situation, which is important to learn that because at the end of this scene, Max and Susanna sleep together in this hotel room in New York City. Then we skip ahead a fair amount of time, 8 months later, into an apartment where Susanna, again, and her now husband, Andrew, so totally different guy, her now husband, Andrew, is living. In this scene, there is a conflict because Susan, again, Susanna's mother, Susan, has had a health scare of some kind. They only know this because they received an accidental call from her health insurance because they have the same name. And they can't get a hold of her. They don't know what's going on. There's all this conflict in the family, so there's some feeling that this is like maybe a trick of some kind or that the mother's being stubborn in some way. Andrew is trying to help, but it quickly becomes clear that this is an interruption to their evening because they were planning to go on a double date, a blind date that they were setting their friends up for. We learned some other important things. Susanna and Andrew have not been married very long, only a couple of months. They did not date for very long before that. They met on a ski trip that Max in the previous scene had been encouraging Susanna to go on. And they were kind of married in a runoff to Vegas kind of a wedding very quickly after starting to date. And so now they're 3 months into marriage. And they are, on this evening, they've set up Max from the first scene, Susanna's adoptive brother and one-time lover. They've set up Max in a blind date with a temp worker, a new worker, basically, at Andrew's office job, Becky Shaw, of the titled character of the play. And there are some worries about this because Max has a really aggressive, kind of almost bullying, it's described that way in the play, personality. Susanna really believes beneath it there's a heart of gold, but that he has kind of a tough exterior. And so that's a worry because Andrew, who doesn't know Becky very well, but he knows that she is sort of delicate. He describes her as being in a kind of transitional phase in her life. The playwright's notes describe that she was probably a very successful high school student, a very popular high school student, very pretty, but then due to some unfortunate events in her life, she's sort of stuck. She doesn't make a lot of money. She doesn't talk to her family. Andrew knows that she's sort of delicate, is how he describes her, and he's worried about how that's going to interact with Max. Max shows up, and the kind of conflict with Susanna's mother bleeds into it because Max, I don't know that I said this, is also their financial advisor. That's like what he does, a financial advisor. So he runs all the money for this family. So he gets involved in the mother stuff. Eventually it's resolved. They learn that the mother is okay by phone, but it's kind of ruined Susanna's taste for going on this date. So her and Andrew decide to stay home, and they send Max and Becky out on this blind date together alone. And that's the end of the act. And the end of the act description is like, you know, something in the final picture should let us know that this is a big moment where everything is about to change for these characters. The top of the next act, the top of the final act of the play, the first line is Becky saying, "Something bad happened on my date with Andrew," or with Max.
Yep.
She's talking with Andrew at lunch at the office, and she describes that they were robbed at gunpoint on their date, and that Max hasn't called her to talk about it, that she is really distraught after being robbed, but hasn't heard from Max. Andrew says, "Wow, what a jerk. I will definitely get Susanna to tell Max to call you." Next scene, Susanna Susanna and Max at Max's hotel room. He lives in Boston temporarily because he's putting up an office building or something. And Susanna's like, you got to call Becky. Max doesn't want to. He didn't really like her. He's upset with Susanna and Andrew for setting him up with someone he perceives as desperate, someone he perceives as much less than him. He doesn't really like talking about emotional, empathetic kind of issues anyway. So he doesn't want to like comfort her through being robbed. He also describes that they've all had a lot of terrible family stuff happen to them. And so the idea of like being robbed is not like the worst thing that's happened to him even in the past couple of years, is his sort of emotional wall defense against that. Susanna really pushes him, please, 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 will you call her? That scene ends basically like with, we'll think about it. I'll think about it, basically. The next scene is Becky and Andrew back together. Again, Andrew is actually married to Susanna, but Becky is like his friend from work, and they're starting to spend a fair amount of time together that you get here. Becky says that she called Andrew over because she heard a weird noise, and she's so scared from the robbery that she like needs somebody to be with her, but she doesn't have any friends or family. So she calls Andrew over, and in this scene we learn that actually after the robbery, Max and Becky slept together, and then Max kicked her out, wouldn't let her stay the night, just sort of sent her out after having slept together, and hasn't talked to her again. Still hasn't called her. Andrew basically takes over as a sort of knight in shining armor, and I mean that in a very sarcastic way. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to protect you. Again, he's married to Susanna, so you can see the problems that are starting to develop. And don't ever talk to Max again. I can't believe it. Next scene, we're back in the hotel room. Susanna and Max are having a sort of prolonged argument about this. Susanna's point is like, you slept with her. What happened? Why did you do that? You're still not calling her. But then she starts to confide that she's becoming worried how much time Andrew's spending with Becky. And Susanna's point is basically like, Max, please, if you just have this conversation with Becky, she'll go away. I'll get my husband back and we can have our normal life again. This will be over for you. This is the only path forward. In a sort of attempt to help Susanna, it seems, Max agrees. So the next scene is a date, or not really a date, a conversation at a cafe between Max and Becky. Becky basically says, the conversation quickly becomes like, why didn't you want to be with me? Like, what happened on our date that you didn't want to continue to date me? You knew, when did you know you didn't want to see me again? Why, why did you sleep with me? The question of whether this was about the robbery, in my opinion, moves past that fairly quickly. And Becky, in a sort of upfront manner, just says like, what happened? I want to know, please tell me. Max, who again doesn't like these kind of conversations, starts to try to escape. And then basically Becky says, well, if that's how you felt about me, you shouldn't have trusted me with a big secret, which is that I know you slept with Susanna all that time ago, and that neither you nor Susanna have told Andrew, Susanna's husband. So the kind of becomes blackmail, or at least that's Max's sense of it, and he kind of grabs her arm. And then we go into a scene between Susanna and Andrew where Andrew has clearly learned that Max grabbed Becky's arm in this cafe. He interprets it as like an assault. Basically, Andrew tries to stand up and say, you shouldn't see Max anymore. He's a terrible person. He did all this stuff to Becky. He grabbed her arm in this cafe. He's terrible. I'm putting my foot down. You shouldn't see Max anymore. Susanna responds badly to that. And so then basically Andrew says, I got to get out of here for a few days. We really need to think about what's going to happen with this relationship moving forward. Susanna is very clearly worried about the fact that he's going to go spend time with Becky. You can sort of see the stakes of their marriage here. Then we go down to where Susanna's mother, Susan, lives. There's been another emergency. Her live-in boyfriend has been arrested. So Susanna and Max are there trying to deal with this problem. Again, Max is kind of their financial advisor, their fixer. But Andrew didn't come because we learned that Becky, tried to commit suicide by cutting herself. This is in an offstage scene. And Andrew has gone to comfort her and be with her, go to the hospital, which is concerning to Susanna that he's not there for this emergency with her mother. I'm going to skip a lot of the conflict that happens there just to sort of describe the resolution. Andrew finally shows up with Becky in tow and basically says, I know we've been in this fight. I really want this marriage. I'm not interested in being with Becky. I know it has seemed that way. I've been confused, but I'm not interested in being with Becky. I'm interested in being with you, but we've got some stuff we need to fix. And so he and Susanna agree that they're not going to see Becky or Max anymore without the other of that married couple in the room. This means that both Becky and Max feel kind of left alone. Susanna and Andrew go back to Providence, Rhode Island, I think is where they live, together, and they end up leaving Becky and Max behind with Susan to deal with her boyfriend being in jail thing. And the end of the play is Becky sort of trying to rekindle things with Max by basically saying, look, we lost those two friends of ours, or those two possibilities for our future, kind of based on who we are and the way that we behave. I understand you, Max, in a way that nobody else does. I lost my parents. I also feel alone. And so she starts to slowly work on Max again. And then that's just how the play ends. We don't know what's going to happen. And Gina Gionfriddo has said that she doesn't even really know what is going to happen between the two of them after the play. So that's the whirlwind, bad manners. I mean, it's all in this sort of very funny. These are highly intelligent people who speak in witty, sarcastic, brilliant. They all have these brilliant things to say. They're all drinking a lot of the play, as you can imagine. Yeah, and I love the description made by many different companies and the New York Times Review of this, thinking about this play as a kind of comedy of manners, or, in a sort of twist play on words, a comedy of bad manners.
Yeah, nice, and nice work, kind of collecting the maelstrom of the play into something pithy, because there's so much going on in this play, and certainly one of the things is that sort of comedy of manners, comedy of bad manners. It's playing with the Vanity Fair book a little bit, certainly inspired by some of the stuff, but this sort of oddity of kind of the contemporary 21st century dealing with class in America. Which is just a very odd thing. It's a very intangible thing in America because we kind of mask a lot of our classism sometimes. But this play really kind of examines it a little bit, and I think brings it into an approachable vernacular that isn't like, I don't know. I'm trying to come up with something off the top of my head, a Chekhov play or something like that. That like has really clear like levels of society. This is like a family that's kind of mired in the reversal of a well-to-do family that had a big business, that had a lot of money, that helped Max out, and when he didn't have a lot of money and his family wasn't from money. But Max has kind of reversed those tables and become someone with a lot of money, but is still on the outside of this family, at least from the mom's perspective. And then the two of them, of Susanna and Max, kind of caught in the middle of that sort of that classist struggle.
Yeah, I actually was surprised by the number of connections between this play and The Cherry Orchard. You mentioned Chekhov, and Gina Gionfriddo mentions this play, The Cherry Orchard, too. And, in The Cherry Orchard, there very much is that reversal of fortunes where, in that case, like the grandson of one of the serfs that had worked on the estate ends up becoming rich enough at the end of The Cherry Orchard to buy the estate from this wealthy family who's now doesn't have any money left after all of the changes in Russian society and all their bad financial decisions and yada, yada, yada. And what's interesting about this play, you described it very well, is that it's this family who's had a reversal of money fortunes. They used to be rich, but due to the bad financial decisions of the father who passed away before the action of the play, they don't have a lot of money left. Now, they're not going to be poor or anything, but they're down. They have to be much more careful with their money now. Everybody does. Meanwhile, Max, who was like, he considers himself an orphan because his mother died and his father is like a useless. He's in jail a bunch. He doesn't have any kind of parental role in Max's life, it doesn't appear. So he gets taken in by this family as a kid. So, comes to them with nothing. And indeed, very late in the play, we learn that Susanna's father, Susan's husband, like actually paid Max's father so that he wouldn't just send him away into the, into the ether to go live with a relative in Texas, but that he could come live with his family. So, Max comes to them as a kid with nothing, and now as an adult is wealthy, and he's the one taking care of everybody. He's the one paying for the expensive things. He has, it seems, an infinite supply of cash. And so it's interesting that the way the Cherry Orchard ends with that huge reversal of fortunes, it sort of feels like that's the way this play begins.
And then throughout you kind of have further pepperings of different folk who are all trying to make it work in some way. Andrew is this like just ended job at a coffee shop or a coffee collective or something like that to get an office job, but is also harboring dreams of a writer, and being a writer and trying to balance that, and like not wanting to work too much so that he has time to write for something that doesn't make money but that might make some money someday. You have Becky who went to a great university and tried really hard throughout her high school and early college time, but had this sort of traumatic event that caused her to drop out of it. So you have the kind of broken dreamer, or perhaps a better term for that is resilient dreamer. Certainly in Becky's case, she kind of continues to push even though she's in the middle of still trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces from what she lost. So you have all these kind of characters that are dealing with where they have found themselves in their, like, for sure late 20s, probably early 30s for most of these characters, and trying to like cobble together what life looks like, even when they're maybe not, it's not everything that they imagined that it could be.
I love it. In one of the interviews with Gina Gionfriddo, she talks about what was interesting to her about this idea for a play is that she and I think it was the director that was her longtime partner were kind of fascinated with the idea of there coming a moment. They described it as being in your 30s. I don't, it may be different for you depending on your life, but there coming a moment when like the thrift store furniture stops being cool. Where like you start to be like, you start to feel like I should be in a different place financially, success, family, all these things that sort of weigh the expectation of society in America, at least, on you. And you start to feel like where I am, I'm embarrassed by. And so she uses the metaphor of the thrift store furniture, right? Like living in this crappy apartment with this thrift store furniture is no longer like I'm young and working my way up. It's cool. It's a status symbol in and of itself. It starts to become embarrassing to you. And you start to look at, the gap between where you are and where you think you should be.
Which, not gonna lie, kind of felt called out. And I think that's a really part of the reason why this is such a resonant play is that it kind of looks at that moment of life that a lot of folk are going to. Certainly, a lot of folk that are going to theater are going through, and certainly offers that side of things up. But you also have characters who got it all, who have the sort of like cultural success. Or at least in the American concept, the popular American concept of cultural success, who also are going through a really similar sort of angst of like wanting to find a relationship that sticks around for a long time. Especially the character of Max is going through this and trying to, even in the midst of his apparent success, maneuver his way into maintaining those relationships, even past the time when Susanna has gotten married to Andrew, or past the point when Susan, who kind of repeatedly tells him that he's not her kid, and that at the end of the play is you'll always be a guest in this house, which is just a brutal line for the end of a play.
Yeah.
Yes. And their relationship. He continuously tries to maneuver finding a relationship that sticks around, which is why Becky's offer at the end is a compelling one, despite the fact that they've been antagonistic towards each other. Certainly he's been antagonistic towards her for much of the play. Despite that fact, she offers him the one thing that he wants, a relationship that might stick around.
Yeah, Becky in that kind of final confrontation, I love the stage direction, so I'm going to read the line before and after the stage direction with the stage direction included. This is Susanna and Andrew have left. Becky and Max are now alone. They're away from home helping Susan with this deal with her boyfriend in jail. I think Susan is off stage at this point, and Becky is really making her case here. She says, "Listen to me, Max. We have damage. People like Andrew and Susanna will always run from us when we show them who we are." And then listen to the stage direction. The stage direction is just aim and fire. And Becky says, "I see everything you are, and I'm still here." That's just such great coaching from a playwright, I think. It's not too prescriptive, but it tells you what you need to know, which is that this is her shot. I mean, this is it. Lay the cards on the table, hand it out, here we go. And it is that kind of it's fascinating to hear Gina Gionfriddo talk about it, and she does a lot of interviews about how different audience reactions are, how different people sitting next to each other at the same production will have totally different perceptions on who's at fault, what decisions the characters are making, and different characters take a lot of crap, different characters get a lot of empathy. Becky, of course, takes a lot of crap from a lot of audience members, and Gina Gionfriddo comes to her defense a lot and says, "Look, this is not a person who actually is clingy or awful or manipulative in like her heart of hearts. This is just a person whose life has not worked out for her, and she's willing to lay her cards on the table in a way that the other characters are not." And so that can feel very upfront. That can feel different than what you would want or expect or feel like is, quote unquote normative for people to behave in relationships with each other. But in reality, it's just Becky willing to be more honest and upfront about what she needs and wants and why she feels she should get it than other people are. Now, that may not be your perception of the play. Again, we joked at the very beginning about how, like, Gina Gionfriddo writes a lot of those kind of notes at the beginning of the play about you should see these characters as really good people, as like everybody just trying to do their best. And it does feel a little bit like, I don't know what I would have thought about this play if I didn't have that going in.
Sure, yeah. Well, it's and I think that's why, like, that stage direction in particular towards the end of the play adds another facet to the character of Becky, who through much of the play gets kind of this, like, certainly the descriptions that other people make about her in the lines of the play. Like, if you're just watching the play, other people's descriptions of her is this kind of like, she had some stuff happen and she's not in a good place right now. I think you said that Andrew refers to her as delicate sometimes. She has some of these lines that are like, yeah, I don't really go out all that much. But a line like this given to an actor to try to portray well shows another side of Becky, of this someone who sees the moment where she is able to affect change in her life and continues to take it. Line up the shot, aim, and fire is a really simple way to kind of show what Becky is capable of and her willingness to continue to push for something better for herself. Even while holding the kind of tension of where she's been in this play, which is she kind of co-regulates quite a bit and needs and kind of pushes herself into Andrew and Susanna's relationship in a way that borders on inappropriate for a good chunk of the play.
I mean, that's the question. At least one of them about Becky is that, there's a reading of this play or a reading of her actions where she's feigning. You don't know. Experiencing in order to sort of steal Andrew away from Susanna, and to what degree? Like, is she conscious of that, or is she so? I think that is a lot of the crap that Becky takes. I think you also could say, on the flip side, in the Becky's totally a saint argument would be like, she was robbed at gunpoint. And the guy she was robbed at gunpoint with then slept her and then never called her again and left her to deal with this by herself. She doesn't have any friends. Her family abandoned her because they're racists, basically. I mean, literally, that's the story. She was dating an African-American person and her family was like, it's him or us because we're racists. And she chose him. And so her family left her because they're racists. She doesn't make any money. She doesn't have any friends. So there's a more empathetic saint-like reading of Becky that is what a crappy situation to happen to her, and she's doing the best that she can. And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I love Susan's. Susan, of course, is Susanna's mother, right? And she doesn't meet Becky until the last scene of the play. And after being in the bathroom, helping her change her bandages, she comes out, and very near the end of the play, she's talking to Becky and says, "You may have been very victimized in your life. You may be a complete con artist. I don't know. My sense is you fall somewhere in the middle."
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And real. So certainly that's true of Becky. And I think to some degree though that's true of a good chunk of the other characters too. Like,
oh yeah, yeah.
They all have this, like, something really bad happened to them, and they made survival techniques to survive it to some degree. And they're now in this moment in life where all of those kind of survival techniques are kind of thrown off by some sort of catalytic event. You have Max and Susanna sleeping together. That's certainly a catalyst at the beginning of the play. You then have the subsequent.
I mean, they think of themselves as brother and sister. So
yeah,
that's a big change.
It's a big change for sure. And then 8 months later, she's married to someone else. Andrew enters the picture out of nowhere. Certainly within the context of their relationship. But then Andrew's there.
And she met Andrew on the ski trip that Max was pushing her to go on.
After they slept together. And so met him there. He's in the world now. And then Becky Shaw comes in. It just you keep getting Stranger Comes to Town over and over as each of these characters kind of, or at least Stranger Comes to Town if the kind of formative person who's experiencing the stranger is Max and Susanna's relationship. Kind of over and over, you have these events that, like, oh, something new gets added, oh, something new gets added, oh, something new gets added, and you're just kind of out of those kind of previous moments of either trauma or something terrible happening to them. They each of the characters subsequently keep making choices based on this kind of new information that they keep getting.
No, I think you've hit on I think maybe even the question for interpreting this play. Is the play about Max and Susanna?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, is the story of this play about Max and Susanna? And in order to grapple with that question, it becomes hard because, again, this is character-based comedy. There is a plot, but the plot does not drive it as much as the characters drive it. And so it becomes hard to identify things like, what's the inciting incident of the play? And I think Gina Gionfriddo has complicated that. And this is not me saying that that's a bad decision. It may be a very, very good decision, but it is more complicated by titling the play Becky Shaw. And we've talked in other situations about how when you title the play after a character, you are handing to the audience a lens through which to interpret that play. If all they know is the title going in, then they know that the playwright has said, this play is about Becky Shaw, in the sense of titling it that. And I don't know that that's really true about this play. But it does seem like maybe even an undue amount of the conversation about the play, at least from what we have found, centers on Becky Shaw. And even our conversation so far has been almost a third of our total time here has been talking about Becky Shaw. And you wonder if this play were titled something else, would that still be the read on the play?
It's kind of like you'd name the seagull Nina or something like that. Like it's that sort of like refocus. And that makes it hard to like because if the kind of core relationship of the play is in fact Max and Susanna, then perhaps the inciting incident, fairly classically, would be dad dies, business is going under, forces them into conversation with Susan about things that they don't want to talk about, and kind of sparks this sort of relationship moment, and then we see the pieces that split off from there. But it doesn't seem like
or I think I would maybe say that it's actually Max and Susanna sleeping together. You know, that the dad dying financial stuff just seems kind of par for the course, honestly, for that family. That sort of seems like the normal world of chaos and family dysfunction. And then from that flows this thing that changes them, Max and Susanna sleeping together. But something in that first scene incites the rest of the play.
Yeah. But then you have this really the really impactful scene at the end of Act 1 that you briefly described in your synopsis. And it's centered around Becky. And she's shown up. They kind of have this sort of awkward, very awkward start to what was going to be a double date that is now just turning into a date. And you have this kind of lighting effect described in the stage directions centering on Becky, as this sort of moment that everything about their life is about to change. All of these characters' lives is about to change. And that pretty directly like names that this is at least partially the inciting incident or something like that, the out of which is going to flow a bunch of complicating action. So yeah, it riffs really interestingly to like centralize Becky Shaw both in the title but also in the action of the play, and her kind of late arrival in it.
No, I think that's totally true. I find that stage direction at the end of Act 1 very interesting because it does feel like this is the moment from which things are about to start, but we're halfway through the play.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a long way to go. I want to read the quote from the author's note, playwright's note is what I would call it, but let's go with that. About, I said it when I was doing my summary that the title of this play was much in question. And I want to read what Gina Gionfriddo says about the title of this play because I just think it's amazing. As a title person, like hearing how the decisions about titles came into being, I think are really interesting. So Gina Gionfriddo says, I was puzzling over the many novels I read in college named after female characters that are A, destroyers, B, victims of destruction, or C, both. Most often, they are both. They're terrible reversals wrought by sexual indiscretions and attempts to climb into a higher class. I'm thinking of novels from the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries mostly. Books by Richardson, Flaubert, Tolstoy, Hardy, and Dreiser, to name a few. On the dramatic front, I'd throw in Hedda Gabler and Miss Julie. I'd tried to change the name of this play at one point, and my director, Peter Du Bois, urged me not to do it. He said that the title Becky Shaw felt ominous and perilous for reasons he could not name. He led me to understand that we have a great literary tradition of ruinous and ruined eponymous women that we've internalized without analyzing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that definitely, like, again, through the note at the beginning, but I think also through the play itself, directs us towards this character, and more, I don't know, nuanced engagement with a character that we maybe could be led to kind of view as stereotypical or view stereotypically based on her actions.
Yeah, she clearly has continued to think about the title and this sort of view of the play in lieu of other famous works that have female characters as the title character, and like what that means. Like, the novel Ethan Frome is named after a male character. It has a very different view of Ethan than, for example, the play Hedda Gabler does of Hedda. And like, how have we sort of internalized things like misogyny? This idea that women are manipulators and class climbers, and right, the convention in a lot of sitcoms, gold diggers, right? I mean, how have we internalized that when we title plays based on women? In one of the interviews, the interviewer is discussing their view of Becky Shaw in the play and has some fairly negative things to say. And Gina Gionfriddo kind of interrupts and just asks point blank, do you think that same thing of Hedda Gabler? Mm-hmm. And I do think that has become one lens through which to view the play. It's a sort of naming the play Becky Shaw is sort of becomes a higher commentary on these female characters at the centers of stories, and when they become the title character, what is that for? Sometimes it seems to be because they have this like quote unquote bad behavior, and that's why we name novels after women. And like, what does that say about our culture and our desire to find that in female characters?
Whew. Yeah, big question for sure. Big, and this play is like has so many of those, like, I don't know. It's like it's peeling back the kind of social constructs of this moment, which is exactly what kind of class-based plays are always trying to do. They're trying to look at why these things that you're blind to all the time, these things that you're not thinking about when you make reactions or decisions in your life, are underpinning each of those decisions. So class based comedy of manners, play of bad manners, do the work of kind of pulling back the carpet, and looking at the underpinnings of why we kind of do the things that we do, without even thinking about it sometimes.
And there's a great example of that if we just want to look dramaturgically at how Gina Gionfriddo does this, and it becomes an issue of contention later in the play. It's a brilliant moment of writing. There's my gushing moment for this play. It is Becky Shaw makes her first entrance into the apartment. First time we've met this character. We have learned a couple of things about her, right? Andrew said that she's delicate. Right before she comes on stage, there's a discussion about how she doesn't have a cell phone and like what that means for like in however this works in America, like her class, like how much money does she make? What can she afford or not afford? We've learned some of this stuff about her, and she comes on stage and she takes off her coat and she's wearing a dress that Gina Gionfriddo's stage direction is amazing. It's basically, my summary is, it's just a little too formal for this occasion. It shouldn't be a sight gag. That's what she says. It shouldn't be like, oh, she's wearing a ball gown. That was not right. It's just a little too formal for this occasion. And that immediately sets up that Becky Shaw does not have the same kind of lived experience that this group of friends that she's coming in to have. And then later, as Susanna has gone to Max's hotel room to argue with him about this date that he went on, Max brings it up. She's desperate. Look at the dress she wore on that date. And then he comes out and says, again, plays kind of, sometimes they voice the things that you described as being sort of hidden and silent in our society, right? That he says, or Susanna, I think, says, wait, you think I set you up on a date with someone who's not good enough for you? And Max says, that's a fact. That's not an exact quote, but that's the summary of that.
Yeah, and yeah, it's revealing all the assumptions that they make about each other, that they make about certainly what her lived experience, also the resources that she has available to her, and yeah, it's full of moments like that, full of these little tiny things that kind of can be brought out in the space of live theater, and kind of examined in a really visceral way, as opposed to just kind of going through life not knowing about them, which is why the comedy of manners is such a great form of theater and so masterfully pulled off in this script.
I will say, as we're just out of time here, I know that in this conversation, we gave Susanna far too short a shrift. I would say I would sort of identify her as the central character of the play. If this is a person on a journey, she's the person on the journey. She's the one we follow that makes these major decisions. The best example of that, and I actually think it kind of sticks out at the end of the play, is that she has this crucial realization that's going to change her path forward. And Andrew and Becky show up, and you learn that he's also had a realization much to the same effect, but his happened off stage. And for me, that moment tells me everything I need to know about who I'm following in this play.
Yeah.
That Susanna's realization happened in conflict with other characters on stage. It changed her. That's the story we're on. And Andrew comes in having had an off-stage moment to the same effect.
Yeah, no, that's certainly good analysis, and also that moment is such a stunning moment in the play where these two characters make this, but Susanna leads the decision making for something that is a drastic change. Maybe even, I mean, it's the decision not to ever meet with someone outside of the room with each other is a drastic change. But it's one that they both make because they both hard commit to each other in this scene. It's a very uber mature like maybe like such a big moment for these characters who kind of are at each other for a lot of this play. And yeah, to have kind of that be born out of Susanna's conversation with Susan and her conversation with Max really centralizes her role as the decision maker, her role as the one who we're on the journey with.
Yeah, and the fact that you don't really see, I mean, you get a little bit of it, of the fallout from the fact that Andrew is not going to see Becky anymore is very much like a minor sub decision. What really comes out of it is the cost and the major change when Susanna says, I'm not going to see Max anymore by myself. We can't continue to have this thing between us if I'm going to be in this marriage with Andrew. It really shows off the way in which the play, what it really changes is Max and Susanna's relationships that they've had since they were kids. And that relationship is under a microscope. Different people have very different interpretations of it. Very late in the play, we get Susan, the mother's interpretation of their relationship, which is totally different than anything that we've gotten before. And I don't know, because it comes late in the play, it feels a little bit like it's given undue weight, her interpretation of the way that the relationship has been manipulative. That's not to say that it's wrong, but it's also not to say that I don't know that I don't think we see Susan as like a clear-eyed third party that's like, I have all the correct answers. Like her interpretation of that relationship is just as much biased as anybody else's is.
Yeah, and she certainly has lines later that reveal like, oh, you have some damaging views of the world, for sure. Yeah. Well, there's so much more. There's so many facets to each of these characters that we could easily fill another like hour or two of conversation with. And that's one of the great things about this play. If you've ever seen it, you know that it generates great conversation and engages these characters really well. So while we are alas out of time on this podcast, we'd love to keep having the conversation with you. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at the username @NoScriptPodcast. We also have a Gmail, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. Find us on any of those sites. We'd love to keep talking about Becky Shaw with all of you.
Absolutely. If you've liked this conversation or if you have disagreements with this conversation, follow up. We'd love to talk with you, like Jackson said, but also think about recommending this episode or this podcast, other episodes that you've liked to your family, your friends, anybody you know that likes theater, scripts, stories, this kind of a discussion of characters, of writing, anything like that. Send them our way. They can find us on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, and other places that you can find podcasts. You could also like us on Facebook, and a link to the new episode appears every Monday when we publish. One more reminder, Mini Month Part 2 is on its way in just a few short weeks. We will see you then. We have episodes between now and then, of course, our regular programming, but in just a couple of weeks, we will have our dedicated month to looking at one-acts and short plays.
So until next week when we're talking about another one of theater's best scripts, I am Jackson Nikolai.
I am Jacob Mann Christensen. Thanks for joining us for No Script the Podcast.